Listen up, kiddos. The Battle of Midway is one of the major factors that deleted Japan's chances of winning World War II. But this fiery debacle of boats and hoes, just kidding, there were no hoes, actually started in the Battle of the Coral Sea. This battle put two of Japan's available aircraft carriers out of commission, one without her planes and one without her deck. Needless to say, not a good combination. After that thingo happened, Japan had 4 carriers left in their combined fleet of this. 4 carriers, 2 battleships, 2 heavy cruisers, 1 light cruiser, 12 destroyers, and a total of 264 planes that took part in the battle. The USA, on the other hand, had 3 carriers, 7 heavy cruisers, 1 light cruiser, 15 destroyers, 360 planes, and 16 submarines. I can't be bothered adding that up, so you do it. Now, Midway was part of Japanese Admiral of the Navy Isoroku Yamamoto's plan of expansion into the Pacific. This plan was called Plan Me. Operation Me. Operation Me was basically the Japanese trying to bait the US into a position where Japan could wipe out their naval supremacy in the Pacific and press Alt F4 on their game. To do this, Yamamoto spread out his fleet, hoping to soften the US and then deliver a fatal blow with the supporting battleships that trailed far behind the main screen. This was in an attempt to weaken the US's daylight strength, a popular naval tactic of the time. If sun shine, we can shoot good. If sun no shine, we no shoot good. But the US had cracked the Japanese naval code, and the US knew their plan. Now, in order for military high command to approve a strike on Midway, the Imperial Japanese Navy had agreed to support the invasion of the Aleutian Islands near Alaska, further thinning the concentration of their navy. Both the attack on Midway and the Aleutian Islands were intended to begin on the same day, but Nagumo's task force was delayed, resulting in the Aleutians being invaded 1 day earlier. Now, for the US to go head-to-head with an expected 4 to 5 carrier-strong fleet, keep in mind they didn't know how much damage they did in the Coral Sea, they needed all of the strength they could muster. And so the US set to work. Admiral Chester W. Nimitz called in a 2-carrier force led by Rear Admiral Raymond A. Spruance. He also recalled Admiral Frank Jack Fletcher's task force, which included the Yorktown carrier. Now, the Yorktown is a speedy boy because it was damaged in the Battle of the Coral Sea and was thought to have needed months of repairs. But since her elevators and deck were mostly intact, she received 72 hours of non-stop repairs at Pearl Harbor. Yorktown's air group was restocked with whatever could be spared. Fighters, bombers, that muesli bar in the bottom of your backpack, I know it's there. I can't be bothered looking up the specific planes and snacks that were stocked, so that's on you if you want to know. So, in the end, the US had 3 carriers in a battle-ready state, along with all the planes on the actual Midway airstrip. And while last time I checked, 3 was less than 4, Japanese Commander Nagumo's carriers had been described as a glass jaw, as they could throw a punch but not take one. This was because their anti-air guns and connected fire control systems were inefficient, deficient, and insufficient. They also had less planes in their air groups because right about now in the war, Japan was like, I can't build that plane because I don't have enough steel. The Imperial Japanese Navy also had a lack of radar and scout aircraft, and their carrier escort warships were deployed as scouts in a long-range ring and not as anti-aircraft escorts. Once again, because of the bad anti-air weaponry and lack of doctrine and training. As Yamamoto was so hasty in his approach, he thought the Yorktown was out for the count. It meant that many ships and submarines were late to get into position as they had slower cruising speeds. This meant the American carriers could reach Point Luck, northeast of Midway, without being detected. Now, time for the fun stuff. 9 a.m., 3 June 1942. Navy patrol squadrons spot some boats 930 kilometers, 580 miles, west-southwest of Midway. 1 a.m., 4 June. Air-launched torpedoes from a US Catalina naval scout hits the Akebono Maru oil tanker, mistaking it for a cruiser. 4:30, June 4. Nagumo launches his first attack on Midway with 36 dive bombers, 36 torpedo bombers, and 36 Zero fighters. 5:34, 4 June. 11 US Catalina planes sight 2 Japanese carriers and the inbound airstrike. Midway sent unescorted bombers to attack the Japanese ships, while the fighter squadron defended the base. Spoiler alert, the bombers got wrecked. 6:20. Japanese fighters damaged the US base. Marine fighters suffer heavy losses while intercepting the force, losing most of their force, but destroying 5 Japanese bombers. The base's AA shot down 3 more. Midway was not neutralized and could still be used as an airstrip. It was clear that a second aerial attack would be necessary if land troops were to invade. The Japanese repelled an air bombing raid on their carriers, only losing 3 fighters and destroying many American bombers. One of these bombers narrowly missed the carrier Akagi's bridge, which could have killed Nagumo and the people commanding the battle. At 7:15, Nagumo ordered the armament of land-based ordnance for another run at Midway. At 7:40, a large American naval force was spotted due east. Nagumo was now in a pickle. He could send his land-orientated strike force to attack the US, but he had just seen how easily unescorted US bombers were shot down, and anti-ground does not mean anti-ship. He would also be required to dig into his reserve planes, not a very smart idea this early in a battle. So he waited, and as the Japanese doctrine preferred full-scale attacks rather than harassment attacks, and because he would only receive confirmation at 8:20 where the aircraft carriers were present, he waited for his original Midway strike force to return, and then rearmed his reserve planes with torpedoes. In the end, nothing mattered. The US had launched their planes from the carriers Enterprise and Hornet at 7 o'clock and the Yorktown at 8. This gave the carriers time to close the gap with the Japanese fleet and simultaneously allow a swifter bombing run from the air group. Though this range was extreme, Operational Commander Frank Fletcher was confident in this choice. This also came to fruition as the Japanese could launch 108 aircraft in 7 minutes, while it took the Enterprise and Hornet carriers more than an hour to launch 117. And while having a scattered air group would risk heavy losses, it ensured the Japanese would not be able to counterattack effectively. Taking heavy fire, a group of TBD Devastator bombers launched their torpedoes, with the only results being evasive maneuvers due to ineffective torpedo technology. This did, however, keep the Japanese carriers off balance and prevented them from launching counterattacks. It also meant the poorly controlled Japanese Combat Air Patrol was out of position for future attacks, and that many of the interception planes were low on fuel and ammunition. 10 o'clock, US Bomber Squadron from the Yorktown drew most of the Japanese air group southeast. At the same time, 3 almost fuel-exhausted bomber squadrons approached from an almost perfect undefended position. Most of the Japanese force was focusing on the Yorktown's bomber squadron, and the Japanese carriers were caught with their pants down. Armed Japanese planes littered the deck, fuel hoses were strewn everywhere, and uncased ammunition and ordnance was being stacked in locations where it could be easily fitted to aircraft, but also easily shot, basically being like a red barrel in a video game screaming, "Shoot me." Almost 2 of the squadrons dived towards the cargo carrier, confirming 4 hits, starting multiple fires and killing most of the commanding officers. A few minutes later, the Akagi was under fire. While it only sustained 1 hit, it was massively effective. The bomb struck the midship elevator, penetrated the upper hangar deck, and proceeded to explode among the armed and fueled aircraft. Everything was on fire. Ship probably looked like a Michael Bay movie. Another bomb exploded under the ship, leaving it with a ruined deck and a heavily damaged rudder. Simultaneously, some of the Yorktown's Devastator bombers attacked the Soryu. They scored 3 hits, setting the entire deck on fire, igniting bombs, fuel, and ammunition stored on deck. Within minutes, everything was on fire, and this was most certainly not fine. They were turning crispy and would most likely be served well done. That is garbage and not how you serve boats. Ships also, surprise, surprise, don't like being cooked and sitting dead in the water. These 3 carriers were evacuated and scuttled. The Japanese now only had 1 carrier, the Hiryu. This ship swiftly jumped into action, sending its strike force to follow the American planes, and promptly scored 3 hits on the Yorktown, knocking out most of her boilers. Now this would have been fine, but it wasn't. She was struck with 2 more torpedoes, losing all power and listing 23 degrees to port. That's the left side. During this attack, the Japanese thought the Yorktown was a different carrier, incorrectly assuming the number of carriers left in the fleet to be 1, while the US still had 2 in operation. A remaining scout aircraft from the Yorktown spotted the Hiryu, and the Enterprise sent 24 dive bombers to finish the job. 4 bombs hit the deck, setting her ablaze and useless. She sank the next morning. Spruance took operational control since the Yorktown was not operationally capable, and decided to partially withdraw, fearing a night attack with the Japanese flagship Yamato, 65,000 tons of pure battleship prowess. The battle ended with just over 3,000 Japanese deaths, including the Akagi, Kaga, Hiryu, and Soryu carriers. The heavy cruiser Mikuma was at the bottom of the ocean, and the heavy cruiser Mogami was heavily damaged. The US lost the Yorktown carrier and a destroyer. This battle, heralded as the spiciest cook-off of all, turned the tide of the high seas in the Pacific. This allowed further US incursions into Japanese-held territory. This also brought to a head the major change into kamikaze tactics of the Japanese Navy and Air Force, as they didn't have enough equipment or enough trained pilots to combat the US effectively.